My first memory of Brian was around 1995. I was eating dinner at Ohio Valley College, and this guy walked in that's very well dressed, which was really strange because I was usually the only guy in a tie those days. And so it was interesting to see another guy on campus with a tie on, and only he made it look good. He walked in and introduced himself, and it took about 15 minutes for me to realize that I had a friend. It took me less than 24 hours to realize I had a brother, and that's the only way I can really remember that. There are several, I guess, interesting things that happened during those times. Once saw Brian's face turn cloudy after he found out that one of the girls on campus had gotten hit, and he was ready to probably cream the guy, but
I talked to him and I said,
I got a better idea. Come on downstairs with me. And Brian didn't really know what I was up to, but I knew that Brian twirled the staff, and took him. We went into this game room, and the guy sitting there playing ping pong. And I walked over, grabbed a pulse cue off the wall, and this guy's looking at me like, "Oh, I am about to get clobbered." And I just kind of looked over at Brian and threw it across the room to him. And I said, "Can you spin that for me?" It took about 30-35 seconds before you couldn't see the pull cue at all. And
I waited about a minute and a half.
and I said, "And stop." And Brian immediately stops this thing with a clap that, well, it alerted the security guards upstairs that there was something going on downstairs. And Brian just tosses the pull cue back over to me, and I put it up in the rack. I said, "Amanda, is that the name, that girl that you adopted as a little sister?" And Brian says, "Yeah." I said, "What would you ever do if she got hit by someone?" And he says, "Well, I've been told I'm pretty good with a staff." And I said, "So how many times can you hit someone with a staff in, oh, let's say a minute?" He says, "I'm up to about 142 hits a minute." I smiled, turned and walked away. It got well known very quick that if you were quote under his protection, you really shouldn't be messed with in any capacity. And that worked really well until the next year when we had to.
Someone didn't hear the
legend, I guess is the way to put it, because another girl got hit, and we were going to talk to this guy, and Brian says, "Well, I have a better idea. He's a Marine, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Why don't you and I go make a phone call?" We did, and the next day the guy was on his way back to North Carolina. Turns out the Marines tend to frown on that sort of thing, and Brian knew that, and so did I. I could talk all night, but two other things really stick out in my mind, and one is a few years after we had left school, the snowstorm had kept planes from flying, and I called and I said, "Hey Brian, I need someone to be picked up." And there wasn't a blink. There wasn't a second's notice. Okay, where and when? And he went out in the middle of a snowstorm to pick someone he didn't even know of. And that was just the type of man he was, and it's who I grew to know. Second, and no one really knows this, but I was a year out of some major surgery and in pretty bad health when I proposed to my wife, and she said, well, what's my backup plan? And I said, well, Brian's your backup plan. She said, huh? So we drove up here and I introduced them, and 30 seconds later I said, hey Brian, if I die, will you marry Jamie? And he didn't blink. He's, well, that's what it takes, okay. I said, all right, I think that'll get the job done there. Final memory I had, though, was the night of his passing. I got awakened by
just feeling warmth and
I need to pray. It wasn't until time later that I coincided the time I looked at the clock, 5:05 in the morning, to that morning that he passed at that same time. And my wife had, who doesn't usually, well, she feels things secondary to me as far as spiritual energies, I guess is the way to put it, but we woke her up about the same time, and she flipped from one end of the bed to the other, which she doesn't ever do in the middle of the night. So it's not surprising that he said goodbye. Thank you.
Go whenever.